Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science slows down and nature whispers you to sleep. Take time to find a comfortable position as you let the outside world fade away. Let it recede as you bring your attention to the present moment. Settle in, relax, and let's begin. Close your eyes, if they aren't already closed. Let your shoulders drop just slightly away from your ears. Let your jaw soften. Feel the weight of your body sinking, just a little more, into whatever is holding you right now. The mattress, the blanket, the stillness of the room around you. Tonight, we're going somewhere quiet. Somewhere far below the reach of wind, below the reach of noise, below even the memory of the day you've just had. We're going down, past the surface where the waves catch the last of the light, past the place where sound still travels the way it does up here, down into water that moves so slowly it barely seems to move at all. Picture it, if you can, without trying too hard. A wide, gentle slope of seagrass, stretching further than you could ever walk in a single afternoon, each blade rising up from pale sand and swaying, ever so slightly, in a current too slow to really call a current at all. The light down here has turned soft and green gold, filtered through so much water above that it no longer feels bright, only warm, the way lamplight feels warm through a curtain. This is where she lives. A small seahorse, no longer than your finger, colored the pale rose orange of a shell left too long in the sun, curled at the very tip of one particular blade of grass. Her tail is wound around it, once, twice, snug and unhurried, the way a hand might curl around the handle of a favorite mug. She isn't going anywhere tonight. She doesn't need to. She never really does. Let your own hands go loose now, wherever they're resting. No need to hold on to anything at all. Seahorses, it turns out, aren't strong swimmers, not even a little. Of all the countless creatures drifting through the world's oceans, hers is among the slowest, the most easily carried, the least inclined to fight against the water around her. Where most fish push forward with purpose, cutting a clean, deliberate path through the current, she simply lets the sea decide. If the water wants to carry her a few inches to the left, she goes a few inches to the left. If it wants to hold her perfectly still, she stays perfectly still. There's no urgency in it, no resistance. Just this quiet, ongoing agreement between her and the tide. And so, instead of chasing the sea the way so much of the ocean seems to, she simply holds on. That tail of hers isn't like other tails. Almost no other fish anywhere in the sea has a tail built the way hers is, not for swimming, not for pushing through water, but purely for gripping. It curls instinctively around anything within reach, the way your own hand might close gently around something offered to you in the dark, without needing to think about it first. The meadow breathes slowly around her. Somewhere far above, the surface is a smear of scattered moonlight, broken now and then by the drifting shadow of something larger passing overhead, unconcerned, unaware of the small stillness happening so far beneath it. Down here, though, everything continues at its own unhurried pace. If you looked closely enough, closer than eyes alone could really manage, you'd see a small fin along her back fluttering, faint and constant, beating as many as 35 times in a single second, too fast to properly follow, more a soft blur than a movement. That flutter is nearly all she has. She has no true tail fin, nothing to paddle with the way most fish do. Just that one small, tireless flicker, working quietly the entire time, whether she notices it or not. Let your own breath settle into something like that same rhythm. Small, steady, working quietly underneath everything else, whether you notice it or not. She lets go of the grass, just for a moment. Drifts. The current takes her a short distance sideways, and the whole time, without any effort at all, she stays upright, because a seahorse is one of the only fish in the entire sea that swims standing straight up, the way you might picture some small, unhurried knight astride some equally unhurried, equally invisible horse. There's something almost dignified about it, the way she holds that posture without trying, simply because it's the only way she knows how to be. Her eyes are doing something unusual too. One turns to look behind her, scanning the grass she just left, while the other swivels forward, watching whatever lies ahead, each eye working entirely on its own, independent of the other, so that she never has to choose between watching for danger and searching for food. She simply does both, all the time, without conflict, without division of attention the way you or I might feel it. Nearby, something small tumbles through the water, a shrimp, nearly invisible, caught in the same slow current she's just been carried by. She doesn't dart toward it. She doesn't hurry at all. She simply waits, patient as stone, patient as the sand beneath her, until the current brings it close enough on its own. And when it finally does, her long, thin snout, shaped almost like a tiny trumpet, or a narrow drinking straw, makes the faintest clicking sound, and the shrimp is simply gone, drawn in whole, faster than you could ever have followed with your eyes. She has no teeth at all. No real stomach to speak of, either, nothing built for holding a large meal for very long. And so she must eat this way constantly, all through the day, one small shrimp after another, sometimes thousands of them in total before a single day is through, just to have enough quiet energy to keep existing at the unhurried pace she prefers. Let that thought settle over you now, the way the water settles over her. No urgency. Just small, steady things, happening quietly, one after another, for as long as they need to. The meadow shifts again, seagrass leaning together as though the whole sea were exhaling, slowly, the way you might exhale right now, letting your chest fall a little further than it did a moment ago. Somewhere nearby, hidden among the leaning grass, is her mate. Seahorses often pair together for a season, sometimes for far longer, sometimes for the whole of their short lives, and every morning, right at first light, when the earliest color returns to the water above them, the two of them find each other in the grass and perform a small, private ritual, turning slow circles around one another, brightening in color, tails briefly entwined, before drifting apart again to spend the rest of the day exactly as they always do. No one fully understands why they do this, morning after morning, without fail. Perhaps it's simply their way of saying, quietly, without any real words for it, I'm still here. You're still here. That's enough. Let your own breathing slow further. In, slow. Out, slower still. Somewhere far above the meadow, the moon continues its own slow climb, unseen from down here, and the whole meadow is settling deeper into its nighttime hush. The fish, the shrimp, the grass, the seahorse, all of it held loosely in the same unhurried tide, none of it in any rush to be anywhere else at all. You can let go now too. A little further than before. There's nowhere else you need to be either. The meadow is darker now, though not in any way that feels uneasy, only deeper, the way a room feels once the last lamp has been switched off and your eyes have had time to adjust, shapes softening into something gentler than they were a few minutes ago. She's still there. tail still curled around the same blade of grass, rocking, ever so slightly, with whatever small movement passes through the water around her. But something about tonight feels different. Her belly, if you looked closely, is round and full, though not in the way you might expect, because in this particular corner of the animal kingdom, it isn't the female who carries the young at all. It's the male. He carries them in a small pouch on the front of his body, not unlike the pouch of a kangaroo, tucked and sheltered and entirely his own responsibility. It's one of the strangest facts in the whole of nature, and yet down here, in this quiet meadow, it feels as ordinary and unremarkable as the tide going out and slowly, patiently, coming back in again. Let your own body feel that same slow rhythm. Something going out. Something certain to return. Inside that small pouch, tucked well away from any current, hundreds of tiny seahorses are quietly growing, sometimes more than 1,000 at once, each one smaller than a single grain of rice, curled tight, waiting. When the time finally comes, in a few more weeks, he'll begin to rock, back and forth, a slow, rhythmic motion, and out they'll drift into the open water, one after another, in a long, unhurried stream, rising instead of falling, like some slow, quiet snowfall happening in reverse. Most of them, if we're being honest, won't survive the wider sea waiting for them out there. The ocean is patient, endlessly patient, but it isn't especially gentle. And so nature gives them enormous numbers from the very start, the same way a tree scatters far more seeds across the forest floor than could ever possibly become trees themselves, simply so that a few, here and there, might happen to find somewhere soft enough to take root. She drifts a little closer to him now, threading herself carefully between two swaying stalks of grass, unhurried, deliberate. As she moves, the color of her own skin shifts, faintly, the way it often does. Seahorses can change color depending on their mood, their surroundings, even how calm or how anxious they happen to be feeling in any particular moment, not so different from the way your own face might flush or pale with feeling, except her entire small body does it at once. Right now, drifting toward him through the dark, she turns a soft, low gold, almost the exact color of a candle burning somewhere in another room. Above them both, something small and pale drifts down slowly through the water, a fragment of loose seaweed perhaps, or a bit of foam that once belonged to the surface, long since sunk down into the quiet below. For a moment, she reaches out with her tail and takes hold of it instead of the grass, letting it carry her a few slow, unhurried inches sideways through the dark, before releasing it gently and drifting back to her usual spot. There are so many different kinds of seahorses scattered across the world's oceans, dozens and dozens of separate species, some no larger than a fingernail, some nearly the length of your own forearm, and each one seems shaped, in its own particular way, for exactly the patch of sea it happens to call home. Some are patterned to vanish completely against coral. Some have grown small frills and filaments that mimic drifting seaweed so precisely that even trained, careful eyes can swim right past without ever noticing. It isn't quite camouflage, not exactly. It's closer to belonging so completely to one particular place that the difference between the creature and its home simply disappears. The night continues to grow heavier around her, the way the air in a bedroom seems to grow heavier the further past midnight you drift. Somewhere in the distance, a much larger shape glides overhead, unbothered, uninterested, moving on without a second thought, because there is so little of her to notice down here, so little reason for anything at all to hurry. Her tail finds the grass stem again. She wins it once, twice, and settles, fully, into stillness. You can settle too, exactly the same way. Let your shoulders sink a little further. Let your hands go still. Somewhere, in a quiet green meadow far beneath the waves, a small seahorse and her mate are doing precisely what they do every single night of their small, unhurried lives, holding gently onto the nearest steady thing, and letting the tide, patient and slow, do the rest of the work for them. Rest now, that will drift further into the meadow soon, but there is nowhere else you need to be right now, and nothing left for you to hold on to except sleep itself. Somewhere above the meadow, the black of the water has begun to soften, just slightly, into the deepest, quietest kind of blue. Not yet morning, not really, but something moving slowly in that direction, the way sleep itself sometimes moves in stages you barely notice until you're already deep inside one. She stirs first, the way she usually does. Her tail loosens from the grass stem, just a little, not letting go entirely, just easing its grip the way your own hand might loosen around a blanket without fully releasing it. Her small body begins to shift color as she moves, from that low, dim gold she settled into last night, into something brighter now, a soft rose, not unlike the very first blush of color that touches the underside of a cloud just before real light arrives. Seahorses can shift their color this way, almost the way a mood might pass quietly across someone's face, using tiny cells scattered through their skin that expand and contract, opening and closing like small shutters, letting more or less color show through depending on what's happening inside them. Right now, hers are opening wide, blooming into that soft pink, because somewhere nearby, in the grass, her mate is stirring too. He drifts toward her, unhurried, the way everything down here moves. They meet in the open water just above the grass, in the small patch of morning that belongs only to the two of them. Around each other, they turn in slow circles, tails almost touching, their colors brightening together, rising in tandem, as if each one was somehow feeding the other's glow. Let your own breath rise and fall the same way now. Slow. Matched. Unhurried. If you were close enough, quiet enough, you might even hear something small pass between them, a soft clicking sound, made by tiny bones deep inside the skull, almost like two small stones tapping gently together somewhere underwater. Scientists still aren't entirely certain why they click this way, though it does seem to happen most often during exactly these moments. Greeting, courting, some quiet reassurance passing back and forth between them that doesn't need any louder sound at all. Her body, if you touched it, wouldn't feel soft the way you might expect from something so delicate looking. Beneath that thin, almost translucent skin lies a series of small, bony plates, ringed all the way down her length like a very fine suit of armor, built from dozens of narrow segments fitted closely together. There are no true scales anywhere on her at all, just this quiet architecture of bone beneath skin, holding its shape the whole time. It makes her slow, undeniably. But it also makes her remarkably difficult to swallow, and most fish that might otherwise consider trying simply give up before they've properly begun, drifting on towards something easier instead. She blinks. Or rather, she doesn't, not really, because seahorses have no eyelids at all, and their eyes never fully close, not even for something like sleep. Instead, rest looks different for her than it might for you. A slowing, a settling stillness, her whole small body lowering itself against the grass while whatever passes for her mind, in whatever way a creature this small experiences rest, drifts quietly into something calmer, something further from the business of the day. Her name, and his, and the whole family's, traces back a very long way if you follow the thread far enough. Two old Greek words, one meaning something close to horse, and the other meaning something nearer to sea monster, because the very first people who ever studied a creature like her, centuries and centuries ago, looked at this strange curled shape and thought immediately of some small mythical animal that had somehow wandered up from the deep. And curiously, that very same root word, passed down through all those centuries, later gave its name to a small, curved region tucked deep inside the human brain, simply because someone, long after, noticed that region was shaped almost exactly like her. She isn't the only one of her kind down here, not by a wide margin. Farther out, among the coral, live cousins of hers so impossibly small, so perfectly disguised, that people didn't even discover some of them until just the last few decades, tiny seahorses no larger than a fingernail, covered in small bumps and colored precisely to match the coral they cling to, completely invisible unless you already happen to know exactly where to look. And in other seas, in other waters far from here, live cousins many times her size, nearly the length of a whole forearm, drifting slowly through kelp forests instead of seagrass meadows, built for an entirely different kind of home. But none of that matters right now, not to her. Right now there is only this, the slow circling, the soft clicking sound passing quietly between them, the rose gold color rising and falling in rhythm, like the tide itself deciding, once again, quietly and without announcement, to come back in. There is no clock down here, no need for one. Whatever time it is exactly enough time for this, for one more slow tone, one more soft brightening of color, one more quiet click passing between two small bodies who have done this same thing more mornings than either of them could ever count, and will likely do it many mornings more, for as long as this particular stretch of grass continues to hold them both. Let your own thoughts rise and fall the same way. Slow circles. Soft color. No hurry anywhere in you at all. Around them, the meadow is slowly waking too, in its own unhurried fashion. A small crab shuffles sideways along the sandy floor beneath the grass, pausing every so often as though listening for something only it can hear. Somewhere further off, a school of tiny silver fish turns as one, catching a thin ribbon of early light, then vanishes again into the deeper green. None of it disturbs her. None of it needs to. She has seen this same slow waking every morning of her life, and it has never once surprised her. The water itself seems to hold its breath in these early moments, the current stilling almost to nothing, as if the whole ocean were simply waiting to see what the day would bring before deciding how hard to push. She and her mate continue their slow turning a moment longer, unhurried, unwatched by anything that matters, before easing gently apart. The dance ends, eventually, the way it always does, gently, without either of them really deciding it, the way a conversation sometimes simply trails off into comfortable silence rather than any clear goodbye. They drift apart again, back to their separate patches of grass, and the whole meadow settles back into its long, quiet stretch of ordinary time. But her mate is different today, in a way she's noticed before and will notice again many times over. His belly, already round for weeks now, has grown tighter still, fuller, the skin stretched thin over the small pouch where hundreds of young have been quietly growing this whole time, safe from the current, safe from everything out here that might otherwise trouble them. And today, something shifts inside him, a restlessness, small muscles along his body beginning to tighten and release, and he starts to rock, back and forth, the way a parent might rock a cradle, except the cradle, this time, is simply himself. And then, one by one, they come. Tiny seahorses, each barely the size of a single grain of rice, drifting up and out into the open water in a slow, steady stream, rising instead of falling, like snow deciding, for once, to fall upward instead of down. There might be dozens tonight. There might be hundreds. From the very moment they leave his pouch, they are entirely on their own in the world. No one will feed them, no one will guide them through the water, and so almost immediately, their impossibly small tails begin curling instinctively toward anything solid nearby, some reflex far older than memory itself, searching, right away, for the very first thing they can hold on to. Most of them, if we're honest, will drift off into the wider sea and never be seen again by anyone who might have loved them. It's simply how this small world has always worked, hundreds of quiet beginnings, so that a few, eventually, might become beginnings of their own, somewhere else entirely. One of the very smallest new arrivals drifts upward on a gentle current, until it happens to bump against something floating just beneath the surface, a loose raft of golden seaweed, torn free from some distant shoreline days or weeks ago, drifting wherever the wider ocean decides to carry it. The tiny seahorse curls its tail around a single strand and holds on, tightly, instinctively. Seahorses that manage to latch onto rafts like this one can travel truly remarkable distances this way, carried for miles and miles across open water, arriving somewhere entirely new without ever once having tried to swim there themselves. Down in the meadow, the mother and father don't follow, and in a way, they don't need to. This has always been how it works, all the way back through time, further than either of them could ever trace. The very first seahorses, scientists believe, evolved from long, slender pipefish tens of millions of years ago, slowly curling their bodies over some unthinkable stretch of time until they became this, small, upright, curl-tailed, holding gently onto whatever steady thing happened to be nearby. And ever since, in shallow water all around the world, in seagrass and coral and mangrove roots, in nearly every warm and temperate sea there is, this same small, unhurried life has gone on quietly repeating itself, night after night, morning after morning, without ever really stopping. The light above the meadow has turned fully soft now, a pale gray-blue easing slowly toward day. She curls her own tail back around her grass stem, settles low against it, and goes still. You can be still too. Just as still. Just as settled. Nothing out here has ever been in a hurry. Nothing ever will be. Just the tide, and the grass, and something small, holding on gently, waiting, without any impatience at all, for whatever comes next. Above the meadow, the sky, wherever it is right now, whatever it looks like above the water you're imagining, continues to lighten by degrees so small you'd never catch them happening. And here below, nothing changes nearly so quickly. The grass sways. The sand settles. The small crab from earlier has found its way beneath a broad blade of seagrass and gone still there, waiting out the day the same unhurried way everything else down here seems to. You don't need to watch for anything either. You don't need to wait for anything to happen. Whatever comes next will simply arrive on its own, the way the tide always does, without you needing to reach for it at all. Rest now. Out on the open water, far from the meadow now, the little raft of golden seaweed drifts on, carrying its single small passenger through the dark. The tiny seahorse holds tight, tail curled twice around a thick strand, riding the slow swell up and down, the way you might rock gently in place without ever quite deciding to. There is nothing around it but water, in every direction, further than it has any way of understanding. And yet it doesn't seem afraid. It simply holds on, the way it was always going to, the way its whole small body seems built to do without needing to be taught. If you looked closely enough at that tail, closely enough that you'd need more than your own eyes to manage it, you'd notice something strange about its shape. Unlike almost every other tail in the animal kingdom, rounded smooth the way a cat's or a lizard's might be, a seahorse's tail is built instead in small, gentle, squared-off segments, plated on four sides rather than curved on every one of them. Scientists who study it closely say that particular shape is exactly what allows it to bend and curl so easily while still resisting being crushed under pressure, and in recent years, engineers designing tiny, flexible robots have actually copied the design directly, finding nothing else in the whole of nature quite so efficient at being both soft and strong at exactly the same time. Let your own body soften now, the same way, soft, but not without shape. Held, but not held rigid. There's a particular kind of strength in that, if you think about it slowly enough. Not the hard, unyielding strength of something that refuses to bend at all, but the quieter strength of something built to flex, again and again, without ever breaking under the weight of it. The little seahorse on its raft has been bending with every small swell of the sea for a long while now, and it will bend through many more before this journey is through, and none of that bending has cost it anything at all. It has simply moved with the water, the way water always expects small, patient things to move with it. Somewhere below the raft, deeper than any light reaches, the true dark of the open ocean stretches on for miles in every direction, vast beyond anything the small seahorse could ever comprehend. And yet none of that vastness troubles it. It has no way of knowing how small it truly is against all that water, and so it simply continues doing the only thing it knows how to do, holding on, drifting, waiting for wherever the current decides to finally set it down. Back in the meadow, the mother is hunting again, the way she does almost constantly through every part of the day. A small shrimp-like creature drifts past her, one of the tiny copepods or misered shrimp that make up nearly the whole of her diet, and her snout, thin and hollow like a narrow drinking straw, flicks toward it without hesitation. The strike itself happens faster than your eye could ever properly follow, one of the quickest movements in the entire animal kingdom, over and finished in a few thousandths of a second, the water rushing in and the shrimp simply gone with it, swallowed whole before it had any real chance to notice what had happened. Nearby, her mate drifts closer, and as they meet, their two tails curl gently around one another, holding loosely, and for a while the two of them simply drift together like that, side by side, connected only by that soft, unhurried grip, not so different, really, from two hands finding each other quietly in the dark, without either one needing to ask. Her skin, if you ran a careful finger along it, wouldn't feel smooth the way you might expect. It would feel faintly bumpy instead, covered in small, rounded knots called tubercles, different in number and shape from one seahorse to the next, almost like a fingerprint written across her entire small body. It helps her disappear further into the texture of the grass around her, one more ripple among a great many others, indistinguishable unless you already knew to look. Later, once the young have gone and the water has settled back into calm, her mate's pouch will slowly begin filling again. Because a male seahorse may carry several broods across a single season, sometimes only weeks apart from one another, this same rocking, this same small snowfall of young repeating itself again and again before the warmth of summer finally gives way to something cooler. Long, long ago, in old stories told by people who never once saw a real seahorse up close, it was said that the sea god's great chariot was pulled through the crashing waves by creatures that were half horse and half serpent, rising and diving endlessly through the foam. No one quite knows anymore whether those ancient stories came first, or whether they were simply an old attempt at describing, in whatever words were available at the time, something that looked a great deal like her. She almost never leaves water this shallow, not by choice. Nearly every seahorse in the entire world lives close to the coast the way she does, in the sunlit, gentle water near shore, rather than out in the deep, open sea where the little raft is drifting right now, alone, patient, carried by whatever the current decides. Let that thought settle over you, heavy and slow, the way a blanket settles. Close to shore. Close to home. Holding on to whatever is nearest. Above the meadow, the surface has begun to shimmer faintly with the first true hints of day, though down here, in this soft green light, it hardly seems to matter. Time passes differently in a place like this, not in hours, not in any way you could easily measure, but in small, repeating rhythms instead. A hunt. A rest. A drift. Another hunt. Around and around, the same unhurried loop, over and over, for as long as the grass keeps growing and the tide keeps returning. She feels none of the weight you might feel from a day stretching out ahead of you, full of things to do. For her, there is only ever this, the next small shrimp, the next quiet moment beside her mate, the next slow settling into stillness once the light finally begins to fade again. Nothing more is asked of her, and she asks nothing more of herself either. The raft drifts on through the night, and somewhere ahead, though the little seahorse riding it has no possible way of knowing this yet, a new meadow is quietly waiting, another slope of gently swaying grass, another patch of shallow, sunlit water, not so very different from the one it was born into, though it has no memory yet of what that even means. It isn't entirely alone out here, in the wider sense of things. Far south, in colder water, live some of its more elaborate cousins, sea dragons, draped from head to tail in long, leaf-shaped fronds that ripple exactly like the seaweed drifting around them, so completely disguised that they seem, at first glance, to be nothing more than drifting plant matter, until, very slowly, you begin to realize they are looking back at you. When the little seahorse was first born, it emerged already looking, in miniature, exactly like its own parents. No strange larval stage to pass through first, no in-between shape to slowly grow out of, just a smaller, simpler version of the very same small creature, ready from its earliest possible moment to curl its tail and hold on to whatever it found. It came from a pouch built specially for exactly this, a fold of skin that had, over the passing weeks, become something more like a small, private sea of its own, safe and warm and entirely sheltered, until, finally, it was time to leave. Out here, without that shelter, the risks are undeniably greater. A hungry crab shuffling slowly along the seafloor. A passing ray gliding low over open sand. Even certain seabirds, diving down suddenly from somewhere far above. Any one of them might end this small journey before it has properly begun. It's part of why so many are born at once, all together, so that holding on, drifting quietly, and simply being lucky enough to go unnoticed is sometimes all it really takes to survive those first uncertain days. If a storm were to move through tonight, churning the water into something rough and fast-moving, even the strongest adult seahorses could easily find themselves exhausted, tumbled, unable to hold their place at all, sometimes washed entirely onto open beaches by the following morning, small and stranded, undone by the one thing that rarely troubles most other, stronger fish, an ocean that decides, every now and then, without warning, not to be gentle. The raft itself has grown thinner along the way, small pieces breaking free and drifting off on their own, so that what carries the little seahorse now is barely more than a few strands still holding together, fragile, temporary, exactly the kind of thing you'd expect to eventually come apart entirely. But it has held long enough. That's all it ever needed to do. But tonight, mercifully, the water stays calm. Scientists have identified somewhere around 4 to some different kinds of seahorses living in oceans scattered all around the world, and every so often, in some overlooked patch of reef or grass, they find one more entirely new to science. Because these are creatures built to disappear so completely into their surroundings that whole species can go unnoticed for years and years, simply waiting, patiently, to finally be seen by the right pair of eyes. The raft begins to slow. The current here has grown gentler, and somewhere ahead, faint in the dark, a shape begins to slowly resolve. Grass, swaying the same slow way it always has, somewhere, for as long as there have been shallow seas at all to hold it. The little tail uncurls from the seaweed strand. Reaches out, tentative. Finds a single blade of grass. And curls tight around it, holding on the way it was always going to. There is no fanfare to any of it. No sense of arrival, the way you might feel stepping through your own front door after a long trip. Just a small tail, reaching, finding, curling, the same simple motion it will repeat, without ever really thinking about it, for the whole rest of its life, on this same blade of grass or the one right beside it. Home enough, for now. You can settle now too, the very same way, loosely, gently, into whatever it is that's holding you tonight. Somewhere behind it now, the open water it crossed to get here is already smoothing itself back over, the way water always does, leaving no trace at all of the long, slow journey that just ended. No mark on the surface. No sign that anything passed through at all. Just a small shape, newly still, curled around a single blade of grass in a meadow it will likely never leave again. There is something quietly comforting in that, if you let yourself sit with it a moment. However far you've drifted to get to wherever you are right now, the water always smooths back over behind you, and all that's left to matter is this, the blade of grass you've found, the stillness you've settled into, the rest that's finally, fully, arriving. Rest. In the new meadow, the little seahorse has stopped drifting entirely now. Its tail has found a single blade of grass, and there it stays, hour after hour, day folding quietly into day, the way its parents once did in their own meadow, and their parents before them, back further than anyone could ever properly count. If you looked at it face on, you'd notice its head doesn't sit in line with its body the way most fish do, but bends downward instead, at almost a perfect right angle, giving it that long, gentle, horse-like profile that gave the whole creature half of its name centuries ago. Just behind that small bent head sit two round little openings, its gills, shaped nothing at all like the narrow slits you'd find on most other fish, but soft and circular instead, opening and closing in a slow, steady rhythm as it breathes, over and over, without ever needing to think about the process at all. Let your own breath find that same round, steady rhythm now. In, out. Nothing forced about it. There is a kind of quiet honesty in a rhythm like that, one that never needs to be adjusted for an audience, never needs to speed up because someone's watching or slow down because someone might notice. The gills open. The gills close. Over and over, whether anyone is paying attention or not, whether the tide is calm or restless, whether the young seahorse is thinking about anything at all or nothing whatsoever. It simply continues, the most basic and most reliable thing about it, the way your own breath has been continuing this whole time without you needing to manage a single part of it. Back in the first meadow, far across the open water, the mother is resting against her own blade of grass, and inside her mate, a new brood has already quietly begun to grow once more. That pouch of his isn't simply a hiding place, as it turns out, tucked away and otherwise unremarkable. Research suggests it works almost like a small placenta would, passing oxygen and nourishment directly into the young growing inside him, keeping them fed and breathing long before either one of those things becomes something they can manage entirely on their own. Some populations of seahorses, scientists have noticed over years of patient watching, seem to time their courtship, and even the release of their young, to particular rhythms of the tide, or sometimes the moon, as though some quiet clock inside them is listening closely to the pull of the whole ocean, deciding, without any words for it at all, exactly when the moment feels right. The little one in its new home is changing too, slowly, the way everything down here changes. Camouflage, for a seahorse, isn't only a matter of shifting color in the moment, the way it might seem at first. Some species can actually grow, or gradually shed, tiny skin filaments over the course of days and weeks, reshaping their own outline bit by careful bit to match whatever they've drifted into. Already, faint traces of pale green are beginning to show along its sides, the same soft shade as the grass now surrounding it on every side. It won't travel far from here, most likely, for the whole rest of its life. Many adult seahorses settle into an area no larger than a small room and rarely leave it at all, unless a storm or some unusually strong current forces them to, a whole life measured out, in the end, in just a few quiet square meters of shallow water. And shallow water is nearly always where you'd find them, wherever in the world you happen to look, somewhere along a coastline, on nearly every continent there is, except the frozen edges of Antarctica, where the sea runs far too cold and far too rough for anything so slow, so delicate, to ever really survive. A few hardier species can even manage slightly murkier, less salty water, closer to the mouths of rivers, where the sea and the land blur quietly together into something in between, more adaptable, in their own quiet way, than you might ever expect from something that looks so fragile at first glance. There's a kind of quiet resilience in that too, easy to overlook in something so delicate seeming. It isn't the resilience of fighting hard against difficulty, the way you might picture toughness working. It's the gentler kind, simply continuing on, adjusting a little, tolerating a little more than expected, without ever needing to make a show of it. Nothing about her announces how capable she actually is. She just quietly manages, the way so many small, unremarkable things manage far more than they're ever given credit for. Let your breath slow again now, matching that same unhurried rhythm, in with the tide, out with the tide, nothing needing to be anywhere else at all tonight. Around a young seahorse, the new meadow continues its own slow business, entirely unconcerned with the small newcomer who has only just arrived. Grass sways. Sand shifts, almost imperceptibly, with each passing current. Somewhere nearby, a small fish darts once, twice, then settles back into stillness, as if it too had somewhere better to be and thought better of the idea. Nothing here rushes. Nothing here has ever needed to. The light moves across the grass in slow bands throughout the day, brightening in one corner while another falls into shadow, then reversing itself as the hours pass, an endless, unhurried trade between light and shade that asks nothing of anyone watching it happen. The young seahorse watches none of it directly, has no eyes built to look up and take in the whole scene the way you might, and yet it exists inside that same rhythm all the same, shaped by it, held by it, without ever needing to understand it. Days pass in the new meadow the way they always do down here, without hurry, without much to mark one from the next, except the slow brightening and slow dimming of the light somewhere far above. Each day looks almost exactly like the one before it, and the young seahorse has no particular way of telling them apart, no calendar, no sense of counting. There is simply today, and whatever small thing happens within it, and then, eventually, the soft dimming that means today has quietly become tonight. The young seahorse barely moves from its spot now, settling further into stillness with each passing day. A home range is quietly forming, the way it does for most of its kind, small and specific, often no larger than the space you might pace across a single bedroom, and once it fully settles, it may stay within that same small patch of grass for the entire rest of its life, never once feeling the need to look elsewhere. Some of its more hidden relatives are so impossibly small, and so perfectly disguised against coral, that they go entirely unnoticed for long stretches of time, and when researchers finally do manage to find a new one, they sometimes name it after whichever diver or scientist happened to spot it first, tucked away among the coral where almost no one else had thought to look closely enough. A few of the very smallest species, fully grown, could rest their whole body comfortably across a single fingernail without any trouble at all. Because they travel so little in their lives, entire small populations, isolated on one particular reef or one particular grass bed, can quietly grow to look just a little different from their nearest neighbors only a short distance away, a slightly different shade here, a slightly different pattern there, shaped, generation after patient generation, by nothing more than the immediate colors of the world directly around them. Buoyancy, for a creature like this, is a delicate thing too, more delicate than you might guess. Tucked inside is a small gas-filled chamber, far smaller and simpler than in most other fish, and the tiniest shift in how full or how empty it happens to be can be the whole difference between drifting gently at one particular depth or sinking slowly, steadily, toward the sand below, which is part of why they so rarely fight the current at all, and so often, instead, simply let it decide. It's entirely possible, in fact, for two seahorses to live their whole lives only a short distance apart from one another, in the very same stretch of coastline, and never once cross paths at all, sheltered, hidden, spread thin across grass and coral in a way that makes company rare, and solitude, in its own quiet way, simply normal, simply expected. There's no loneliness in that, at least not the way you or I might feel it. Solitude, for a creature like this, isn't an absence of something it's missing. It's simply the shape its whole life naturally takes, the same way silence isn't an absence of sound to someone who has never needed noise to feel at ease. She doesn't wonder about the other seahorses she'll never meet, doesn't measure her days against some idea of what company might have added to them. She simply exists, fully, exactly where she is, with exactly who and what is already there. Back in the first meadow, the mother has drifted lower for the night now, tail wound snug around her chosen grass, her colors dimming slowly toward that same low gold from earlier. Her mate rests close beside her, his pouch quietly at work, doing what it has always done, what it will keep doing for as long as the season allows. And far off, in its own small patch of green, the young one from the raft has, at last, become the very same pale, soft shade as the grass all around it, settled fully now. Hidden. Home. Everything, everywhere down here tonight, has simply found its place to hold on to. Somewhere between the two meadows, the open water carries on the way it always has, indifferent to the distance, indifferent to whatever it is that separates a mother from a child she'll never see fully grown. It is simply water, doing what water does, going wherever it's pulled, carrying whatever happens to be small enough and patient enough to let it. And yet, in a strange, quiet way, both meadows breathe the very same rhythm tonight, the same slow brightening of light, the same slow dimming, the same small bodies curling gently around the same kind of grass, half an ocean apart, and never once feeling that distance as anything more than simply the shape of the world they were born into. You have too. Let's go a little further still. Rest. Seasons move slowly down here, the way everything does, but they move all the same, folding one into the next so gradually that you'd never quite catch the moment one ended and another began. Grass grows, fades, grows back thicker the following year. Light shifts from long to short and slowly back to long again. And through all of it, the mother and her mate stay close to their same patch of meadow, holding the same rhythm they always have, the same rhythm their own parents likely held before them. A seahorse's life isn't long, as lives go, measured against the great slow span of the ocean itself. Some of the smaller kinds live only about a year, gentle and brief, entire lives folded into a single turn of the seasons, while some of the larger cousins may see 3, 4, even 5 seasons pass before they are finally done. It's a short kind of time, when you set it against a whale or a coral reef or the wide ocean holding all of it, but it never once seems to hurry them. They live exactly as slowly inside that short span as anything else might live inside a much longer one. Their bodies, delicate as they are, rarely leave much behind once they are gone. Fossils of ancient seahorses are exceedingly rare finds, their fine, ringed plates too fragile, too fine, to survive the slow crush of time the way a heavier, denser bone might manage to. And yet, every so often, in some old seabed turned patiently to stone over millions of years, one is found anyway, curled in exactly the same shape as the one drifting through this very meadow tonight, as though nothing about the design has needed to change in all that time. She doesn't rely only on her eyes to know what's near her, either. Something in her small body seems to sense the very faintest movement passing through the water itself, the flick of a shrimp's tail somewhere close by, the ripple of something larger swimming past at a distance, a kind of quiet, wordless awareness that doesn't need any light at all to work. Let your own awareness settle the same way now, not watching for anything in particular, just quietly, gently aware, the way she is, without needing to see a single thing to know you're safe. It's a different kind of noticing than the kind you might practice during a busy day, scanning for problems, watching for what needs fixing. Hers is looser than that, more like simply resting inside the water and letting it tell her what it needs to, without ever straining to catch anything in particular. You can borrow that same looseness right now, if it helps, not listening hard for any one sound, just letting whatever sound happens to be nearby drift past you the way the current drifts past her. When she and her mate meet for their morning dance, there are moments when both of them turn pale together, almost entirely white, some soft signal passing quietly between them that no one has ever fully understood, before their color slowly deepens again into its usual shade, the way a held breath finally releases. Long before either of them existed, sailors far above, on old wooden ships crossing this same wide ocean, carried small carved seahorses with them for luck, worked into figureheads, pressed into rings, sketched into the corners of old, weathered maps, trusting this small, strange shape to watch over their safe passage home, across waters far rougher than anything down here in the meadow will ever know. Her mate's part in bringing new life into the world began, each and every time, in an unusual way. She passes her eggs directly into his pouch through a small, specialized part of her own body, built exactly for that single purpose, and it's only once they're safely tucked inside him that they're truly fertilized at all, hidden away and warm, entirely his to carry from that point forward. Of everything strange about the two of them, this may be the strangest and the gentlest all at once. Of every single creature with a backbone on this whole wide earth, the seahorse is the only one where it is the male, not the female, who carries the young, who feels them slowly grow inside him, who brings them, eventually, into the world. Let that settle over you now like the tide settling over sand. Strange, gentle, quietly certain, the way so few things ever really are. There is something almost restful in knowing that so much of what happens down here happens without struggle. No fighting over who carries the weight of new life. No arguing over whose turn it is to rest and whose turn it is to work. Just two small bodies, each doing exactly what they were built to do, trusting the other to do the same, morning after morning, without needing to ask. Above the meadow, somewhere far beyond where either of them could ever see, larger currents move the whole ocean in slow, sweeping patterns that take months, sometimes years, to complete a single turn. Neither the mother nor her mate has any sense of those larger movements, any more than you might sense the turning of the whole earth beneath your bed tonight. And yet they are carried by it all the same, the way everything down here is carried by something larger than itself, without ever needing to understand the shape of it. Somewhere within a few hours of being released, each of those tiny young, including the very one now settled so far away in its own distant meadow, must already begin to hunt for itself, because there will be no second chance at being fed by anyone else, no parent waiting nearby to help. It simply reaches, and clicks, and reaches again, the exact way its own parents always have, until, slowly, it learns. It isn't as alone there as it might first seem, either. That single patch of grass and coral, so easy to overlook from above, quietly shelters a whole small community of hidden creatures just like it. Pipefish, long and thin, curled the same careful way, tiny crabs tucked deep into narrow crevices, small shrimp drifting close to the very same blades of grass, an entire hidden neighborhood, none of them easy to spot at all unless you already know exactly where to look for them. None of them announce themselves to one another, exactly. There's no greeting exchange between the pipefish and the crab, no formal acknowledgement that they share this same small patch of world. And yet they do share it, quietly, continuously, each going about its own small business a few inches from the others, held together by nothing more than the same patch of grass and the same gentle current moving through all of them at once. Not every pair stays together forever, either, however steady the morning dance may seem. If a storm scatters them, or some sudden fright pulls them too far apart for too long, some seahorses, rather than searching endlessly through open water for a mate now lost somewhere out there, will eventually find another instead, and begin that same quiet morning dance all over again with someone new. It isn't a sad thing, down here in this world. It's simply another way the meadow keeps going, generation after generation. In calmer, more sheltered waters, a quiet tank somewhere, steady food arriving reliably, no storms at all to worry about. Some of the larger seahorse species have been known to live past 10 full years, far longer than most ever manage out in the open sea, where the currents are considerably less forgiving of any small mistake. It's a strange thing to consider, how much of a life like hers depends not on anything she does herself, but simply on how gentle or how rough the surrounding world happens to be. The same small body, the same patient habits, could mean a single hard season out here, or a full decade somewhere calmer. She has no way of knowing which one she's been given. She simply lives the one she has, as fully and unhurriedly as she can. As winter nears in the cooler parts of the world, far from this warm meadow, some seahorses drift down into deeper water, slowing themselves, resting, waiting out the coldest months in stiller, steadier currents, before easing back up into the shallow grass once spring finally warms the shallows again. It isn't quite sleep, not the way you might sleep tonight, more a long, patient stillness, ready to lift the moment the water turns gentle again, whenever that finally happens. And inside that pouch, in the weeks before birth, something quietly remarkable happens, easy to miss unless you know to look for it. The fluid surrounding the growing young slowly shifts, adjusting itself bit by careful bit, drawing closer and closer to the exact saltiness of the sea outside, so that when the moment finally comes, and they drift out into open water for the very first time in their lives, the change is barely a change at all. Just one gentle world easing quietly into the next. The mother settles low against her grass. Her mate settles beside her. And somewhere else entirely, in its own small patch of green, so does the one that drifted so very far to get there. Everything, everywhere, easing into the next quiet thing. Somewhere between the two meadows, the wider ocean continues its own long, patient work, moving warmth from one place to another, moving small drifting lives from one shore to some entirely different one, indifferent to distance, indifferent to time, simply doing what oceans have always done since long before there was anything living in them at all to notice. And within that vast, unhurried motion, two small stories continue anyway, one here, in this original meadow, one far off in another, both following the very same quiet pattern, both needing nothing more than a blade of grass, a steady tide, and whatever patience it takes to simply hold on and wait. Rest now. Let it carry you the rest of the way. Not every seahorse lives in water quite this shallow, quite this gentle. Some make their home in tide pools barely deep enough to cover a single hand, warmed quickly by the sun and just as quickly cooled again once it sets. Others, further out past the reef, drift in water 50 meters down or more, where the light turns thin and blue-gray, and the current moves with a weight this shallow meadow never quite feels. But most, like her, prefer it here, close to the surface, close to the grass, where the light still reaches all the way down to the sandy bottom, painting everything in that same soft green gold she has always known. When she isn't holding onto anything at all, drifting for whatever brief moment between one grip and the next, her tail doesn't hang loose the way you might expect it to. It curls, on its own, into a small, tight spiral, the shape it seems to want to be in more than any other, ready, always, patiently, to wrap around whatever comes next, the way a hand left resting might still curl slightly inward, even in sleep. Let your own hands rest that way now, if you like. Not gripping anything. Just curled, gently, the way they'd naturally want to be. There's no effort in a curl like that, no muscle working hard to hold a shape. It's simply what happens when nothing else is asked of the hand, or the tail, or the body, the resting shape underneath all the other shapes it might need to make throughout a busier day. Yours can find that same resting shape now, fingers loosely curled, palms soft, nothing gripped, nothing held onto, nothing needed at all. Some of her more particular relatives live their entire lives attached to just one single kind of coral, or one single type of sponge, matching its exact color and texture so closely, so completely, that they seem to have grown directly from it rather than simply landed there one day by chance. It's less a home, in the end, than a kind of quiet merging, the creature and the coral becoming, over time, almost impossible to tell apart. Imagine choosing one single place, so completely, that you slowly began to take on its color, its texture, its whole quiet character, until a stranger passing by could hardly tell where the place ended and you began. That's not quite loss of self, the way it might sound at first. It's closer to a very deep kind of belonging, the sort that only comes from staying somewhere long enough, and closely enough, to stop needing to be anything other than exactly what that place shaped you into. People have known of creatures like her for a very long time, far longer than you might guess. Scientists were already writing down her family's name, sorting through and describing them carefully, as far back as the 1700s, though sailors long before even that already had their own name for her, calling her, in some old, weathered ports, simply a sea pony, long before anyone thought to give her a formal one. It's a small comfort, somehow, that she was known and named long before anyone truly understood her. People noticed her, wondered about her, gave her a place in their stories, well before the science ever caught up. Being understood, it turns out, was never really the price of being noticed and cared about in the first place. Her skin, delicate as it looks from any distance, isn't entirely unprotected either. A thin layer of natural mucus coats it, guarding gently against small parasites and minor scrapes, the way a thin film of oil might protect something quietly left out in difficult weather, unnoticed, doing its slow work in the background the whole time. Far off in its own meadow, the young one that rafted here so long ago spent its very first hours differently than you might imagine at first. Many newborn seahorses linger near the surface for a little while after birth, drifting quietly among bits of floating debris, catching what light and warmth they can, before finally making their slow, careful way down to the safety of the grass waiting below. Not every seahorse wears the same soft green and gold she does, either. Some, especially those living against a bright orange sponge or a particularly vivid patch of coral, turn shades you wouldn't necessarily expect from something so quiet and unassuming: bold oranges, warm yellows, even deep, rich purples, matched so precisely to their surroundings that the color itself becomes a kind of disappearing act, a costume worn so well it stops being a costume at all. And her long, thin snout is shaped exactly for where she lives, the way so much about her seems to be, a little longer than it might be if she lived among short reef coral instead of tall, swaying grass, built, like everything else about her, for one particular patch of sea and no other. Let your own body soften a little further now, the way her tail softens into that same small spiral, needing nothing to hold on to right now except stillness itself, and whatever is already holding you. Inside her mate, the newest brood stays sealed away for almost the whole of its slow growing, the pouch closed snug around them the entire time, opening fully only at the very last moment, when it's finally, truly time to let go. She herself, for all her slowness, isn't entirely without quickness when quickness is actually called for. If something moves too fast nearby, a passing shadow, a sudden current, the wrong kind of motion catching the corner of her vision, a fast ripple through her small fins can send her darting a short, surprising distance, faster than anything this size should really be able to manage, before she settles again, almost immediately, into her usual unhurried drift, as though nothing at all had happened. Across a whole lifetime, with brood after patient brood, her mate may father tens of thousands of young in total, this same rocking and releasing repeating itself, season after season, year after year for as long as he lives. And yet, of all of them, only a small handful, often far less than 1 in 100, will ever grow old enough to do the very same thing themselves. It's an almost unimaginable number, if you actually try to picture it, tens of thousands of tiny lives passing through that one small pouch over the years, most of them destined to drift off into a story we'll never know the end of. And yet nothing about him seems weighed down by that number. Each brood is simply the one in front of him, cared for exactly as fully as the one before it, without any sense of grief for the ones that came and went before. Even between the two of them, small differences exist beyond the obvious one of the pouch, his tail perhaps a touch longer than hers, her coloring settling into a slightly different shade than his, small variations that, over the couple's whole life together, become as familiar to each other as a particular voice might become familiar to you, recognizable in an instant, without ever needing to think about why. They aren't the only quiet ones sharing this meadow, either. Nearby, Small sea slugs in bright, improbable colors creep along the very same blades of grass, taking their own slow time about everything, and delicate nudibranchs drift past every so often, all of them living the same slow, unhurried life she does, all of them equally easy to overlook if you didn't already know exactly where to look. None of them keep each other company in any way you or I might recognize as friendship. And yet there's something oddly reassuring about a meadow this full of quiet, unhurried lives, all moving at roughly the same patient pace, none of them rushing past the others, none of them disturbing the calm that the whole place seems to agree on, without ever needing to say so out loud. The light above is dimming again now, the way it does every single night without fail. She lets her tail tighten one more time around her chosen blade, feels her mate settle in beside her, and, far off, feels nothing at all from the young one in its distant meadow, except perhaps some quiet, wordless echo of that very same stillness, passed along the water the way a feeling sometimes passes between two people without either one saying anything at all. Everything, everywhere down here, simply easing, once more, into rest. You can ease there too. Atop her head, faint and easy to miss unless you already know to look for it, sits a small crown of bone, delicate ridges rising just slightly above the rest of her, what researchers, in their own careful language, call a coronet. No two are shaped quite the same way, even within the very same species, so that scientists who study a single meadow over months, sometimes years, can sometimes recognize one particular seahorse again and again, simply by the shape of that small crown, the same unmistakable way you might recognize a familiar face across a crowded room without needing a second glance. It's a strange thought to sit with, tonight of all nights, that somewhere out there, quite possibly, someone has been quietly keeping track of her, writing down which stretch of grass she prefers, noting the shape of that small crown on her head, season after season, the way you might note the return of a particular bird to the same tree each spring. She has no idea any of this is happening, of course. She simply lives her small life, and somewhere, unbeknownst to her, that life is being gently recorded, one patient visit at a time. She isn't entirely without help keeping clean, either, quiet as her life mostly is. Now and then, a tiny shrimp or a small fish will drift close and pick delicately at her skin, clearing away small parasites she has no way of reaching on her own. A brief, quiet exchange, over almost as soon as it begins, that leaves her feeling, in whatever way a seahorse feels such things, a little lighter for it afterward. Some of the most hidden pygmy seahorses in the entire world weren't found by anyone specifically searching for them at all, as it happens. Researchers studying a piece of coral for some entirely different reason simply noticed, much later, back in their own photographs, a tiny shape that turned out, on closer inspection, to be a seahorse no one had ever properly documented before, hiding in plain sight the whole time, patient as everything else down here tends to be. In quiet aquariums, far from any real ocean at all, some of her distant relatives are cared for and bred deliberately, generation after careful generation, fed largely on the very same small misered shrimp they'd otherwise hunt for themselves in the wild, part of careful, patient efforts to understand them better and, in some places, to help return young seahorses to grass beds that badly need them. Because a healthy meadow like hers matters so very much to creatures like her, some coastal communities have set aside patches of seagrass entirely, protecting them carefully from disturbance, simply so places like this one can go on quietly existing the exact way they always have, undisturbed, for however long the sea allows it. Her eyes, moving as they always do, one watching forward and one watching behind at the very same time, can each swing through nearly half a full circle entirely on their own, giving her something close to a complete view of the whole world around her without ever needing to turn her head even slightly. Even her small dorsal fin, rippling constantly, tirelessly, seems to do more than simply push her along through the water. Subtle changes in the pattern of that ripple appear to help her steer, ever so slightly, left or right, up or down, a quiet rudder hidden in plain sight the whole time, doing careful work no one watching from a distance would ever notice. There is a kind of quiet lesson in that too, if you're inclined to look for one. So much of what keeps her safe isn't something dramatic. It's a mucus layer, a ripple of fin, a small crown of bone that helps someone else recognize her later. None of it loud, none of it announced. Just small, steady systems doing their small, steady work, mostly unnoticed, mostly unthanked, keeping the whole quiet arrangement of her running smoothly night after night. And in nearly every language spoken along nearly every coastline in the entire world, whatever word people eventually chose for her, it tends to land, again and again, on the very same idea, some version of Little Horse of the Sea, as though everyone, everywhere, entirely independently, looked at this same small shape and thought, immediately, of the very same thing. Let that quiet agreement settle over you now. So many different people, so many different words, all noticing, somehow, the exact same gentle shape. When her mates young are finally ready, after all those long, patient weeks, the birth itself isn't simply a matter of drifting free on its own. The walls of his pouch tighten and release, real muscle doing real, deliberate work, gently pressing the young out into open water one careful body at a time, rather than simply letting them go and hoping for the best. There's an effort in that which rarely gets acknowledged, even by the researchers who study it closely. It would be easier, in a sense, if the young simply drifted out on their own, no work required of him at all. Instead, he labors through it, muscle by muscle, the same way any parent might labor through the harder parts of bringing new life into the world, whether anyone happens to be watching or not. If something startles her suddenly, a flash of unexpected movement, a shadow crossing where no shadow was a moment ago, her color can darken all at once, quick as a held breath catching in your chest, before easing back to normal again just moments later, a different, much faster kind of color change than the slow, patient shift she uses for her everyday camouflage. Far off, in its own meadow now, fully grown into itself at last, the young one that rafted here so long ago has, by this point, likely found its own morning ritual too, some other seahorse nearby, some quiet dance at first light, the same small crowned head, the same patient tail, the whole pattern simply repeating itself the way it always has, in meadow after meadow, all across the world, wherever the water is shallow enough and gentle enough to allow it. The night is settling deep now, deeper than before, the grass barely moving at all. Somewhere close by, small nudibranchs and sea slugs have tucked themselves into their own quiet corners for the night. The cleaning shrimp from earlier has long since drifted off toward its own rest, its work finished for the day. She feels her mate settle beside her one more time, and together, without needing to decide it in any conscious way, they let their tails go a little looser, their bodies dim a little further, gold fading gently, steadily, toward something closer to shadow. Nothing in this meadow is in any hurry tonight, and nothing needs to be. The tide will keep its own quiet rhythm long after both of them, and everyone else in the water around them, close their non-existent eyelids to whatever it is a seahorse dreams of, if it dreams at all. Let yourself dim the same way now. Gold to shadow. Awake to something softer. Rest. Somewhere nearby, half hidden among the same grass she calls home, a slim, straight-tailed relative drifts past, a pipefish, cousin to her in almost every way except one important detail. Its tail stays straight the whole time, never curling the way hers does, never gripping onto anything at all, simply trailing along behind it like a thin ribbon caught loosely in the current, going wherever the water happens to take it. It's a small reminder of how many different ways there are to solve the very same problem. Both of them evolved from something similar, long ago, and yet one chose to hold on while the other chose to simply drift. Neither way is more correct than the other. They're simply two different answers to the same quiet question every small creature in this meadow eventually has to answer. How do you get through a life this vast, this uncertain, without being swept away by it entirely? Her more elaborate pygmy cousins were only properly discovered by people quite recently, in the long span of things. One of them found, decades ago now, clinging tightly to a sea fan coral that a researcher happened to be studying for an entirely different reason altogether, and named for him the very moment he realized what he'd actually stumbled upon. A few others were identified only in the early years of this current century, discovered the very same accidental way, hiding in plain sight until, finally, someone happened to look closely enough to notice them. Further south, in cooler water off one particular coastline, live her most elaborate relatives of all, leafy and weedy sea dragons, found nowhere else in the entire world but those specific southern waters, trailing long, delicate ribbons of skin that make them nearly indistinguishable from drifting kelp, even to a careful, practiced eye. Her own family holds both ends of the size scale, remarkably. Somewhere out in warmer reef water swims the largest of them all, a heavy-bodied giant among seahorses that can grow to nearly the length of your own forearm, while elsewhere, tucked into coral so small you'd need to look twice just to be sure, lives the very smallest of her kind, barely over a centimeter fully grown, small enough to rest, entirely, across a single fingertip without any trouble at all. Despite how solid her small armored body looks from any distance, she's considerably lighter than she seems, made mostly of bone and thin skin rather than heavy muscle, which is part of why even a gentle current can carry her a surprising distance without her needing to do anything at all to make it happen. Researchers who study meadows like hers patiently, for years at a time, have learned to recognize individual seahorses simply by the shape of their coronet and the particular pattern of tiny spots scattered across their skin. Not so different, in the end, from how someone might learn to recognize a particular whale by the marks running along its tail. Let your own thoughts drift as loosely as she does right now, carried gently, without any real effort at all, by whatever quiet current happens to be passing through the room around you tonight. Pairing, for a seahorse, isn't usually a single moment's sudden decision, the way you might imagine it. Before fully committing to one another, two seahorses will often spend several mornings simply greeting each other, briefly, testing the rhythm between them slowly, day by patient day, before ever settling into anything more lasting than that. There's something gentle in taking that much time before deciding anything permanent. No rush towards certainty, no pressure to know right away whether this particular morning greeting will turn into a whole season, or longer. Just one more small meeting, and then another, and then, eventually, without any single dramatic moment marking the change, two lives that have simply become intertwined. Even seahorses cared for in careful aquariums, far from any wild reef at all, tend to keep up this same daily ritual once properly paired, greeting each other each morning exactly as they would out here in open water, as though the habit truly belongs to them as individuals, rather than simply belonging to the wider ocean around them. Some of her more heavily armored relatives, like the thorny seahorse, carry longer, sharper spines across their bodies than she does, an extra layer of defense some species have simply grown into over long stretches of time, while others, like her, rely far more on staying still and unseen than on any kind of visible weaponry. Long before anyone ever wrote a single scientific word about her kind, separate people scattered across entirely different coastlines, around the Mediterranean, across wide stretches of Asia, throughout the Americas, each arrived, apparently without ever once comparing notes with one another, at remarkably similar stories about her. A small guardian of the sea, a quiet bringer of luck, a gentle protector of anyone who trusted the water enough to sail out onto it. There's something quietly moving in that kind of coincidence, if you sit with it a moment. People separated by whole oceans, speaking languages that shared no common root at all, looking at the very same small, curled shape and arriving, independently, at the very same feeling about it, that here was something worth protecting, something worth carrying for luck, something small enough to hold in your hand and yet somehow large enough to hold a little bit of hope inside it too. In some species, the males seem to carry a slightly larger, more noticeable coronet than the females do, though the difference is subtle at best, and not every kind follows quite the same pattern in quite the same way. Somewhere out there tonight, the young one from the raft, fully grown by now, likely reached this same readiness itself somewhere between 6 months and a year after first settling, depending on the warmth of its water and the particular season it happened to be born into. Old enough now for mornings of its own, dances of its own, a pouch of its own perhaps already beginning to fill, if it hasn't already. The whole meadow, near and far, has settled fully into night now. Grass barely stirring at all. Water barely moving. Everyone here simply held, gently, exactly where the tide happened to leave them. Somewhere between the meadow she calls home and the one her distant offspring has claimed as its own, the wide, dark ocean simply continues on, unbothered by the distance, unbothered by anything at all, doing the same slow work it has always done, carrying small lives gently from one shore to another, asking for nothing in return. You are too. Rest now, a little deeper still. On rare occasions, during the very lowest tides of the year, a seahorse resting too near the shallow edge of a meadow might find itself briefly out of the water altogether, stranded for a short while on wet sand under open sky, and if the air stays damp and the sea returns quickly enough, as it almost always does, it can come through the small mishap completely unharmed, no worse for the brief experience. Tonight, though, she rests well below that shallow edge, deep in the grass, with nothing at all above her but calm, steady water. It's a small, rare risk she carries simply by living where she lives, the same way anyone living close to any edge carries some small risk they rarely think about. And yet she doesn't dwell on it, doesn't spend her days worrying about tides she can't control. She simply stays where the water is deep enough, most nights, and lets the rest take care of itself. Each morning, during that brief dance with her mate, her color seems to brighten more than at any other single point in the whole day, before easing back to its quieter, duller everyday shade for the many slow hours that follow afterward, a small daily flourish, and then, gradually, a return to the ordinary rhythm of things. If you stretched her tail out fully, straight instead of curled the way it usually is, it would likely measure longer than the rest of her whole body combined. Most of what makes up her overall length isn't her small, round body at all, but that long, patient, endlessly gripping tail trailing behind it. She isn't careless about what she chooses to hold on to, either, even in a meadow full of options. Left to choose freely, she tends to favor a blade of grass close to the width of her own curled tail, gripping best around something neither too thin nor too thick for her liking, the way a hand might find its most comfortable grip around one particular size of branch and no other. Even seahorses raised carefully in aquariums, having never once seen another seahorse perform this particular morning greeting, will still perform it themselves the very first time they're introduced to a mate of their own, suggesting the dance isn't something learned by watching at all, but something carried quietly within her simply by being what she already is. Other, larger fish drifting through the meadow sometimes nose at her out of nothing more than simple curiosity, a brief bump or gentle nip that has nothing whatsoever to do with hunting her, more a passing territorial nudge than any real threat at all, over as quickly as it began in the first place. Every so often, for reasons no one has ever fully worked out, she opens her snout wide in something that looks remarkably like a yawn, entirely unconnected to any feeding at all, one of many small, ordinary mysteries about her that science still hasn't quite managed to settle, even now. Because she is so small, so quiet, and so easily overlooked by anyone passing by, creatures like her were among the very last major groups of fish that people ever came to properly study and understand, long after far larger, far more visible fish had already been thoroughly examined and described. Let your own body go a little heavier into the mattress now, unhurried, unremarkable, the same quiet way she simply exists down here, mostly unnoticed, mostly and completely at peace. Even now, with everything researchers have managed to learn about her over the years, no one really knows exactly how many seahorses like her exist out in the wide ocean. They hide too well, blend too completely into everything around them, for anyone to simply count them directly the way you might count something easier to see, so most estimates rely instead on quieter, indirect methods, patient guesswork built carefully from small clues rather than any single exact tally. There's a strange kind of peace in that uncertainty, if you let yourself sit with it. She doesn't need to be counted to matter. She doesn't need a precise number attached to her existence for her life, tonight, in this meadow, to be entirely real and entirely complete. The not knowing is only a problem for the people trying to keep track from above. Down here, she simply is, whether anyone has managed to count her or not. When she was first moved, long ago, from one patch of grass to another nearby, it took her several full days before her color truly settled and her appetite properly returned. A brief, unsettled stretch of adjustment before everything, gradually, felt entirely normal again. She and her mate, researchers now believe, likely recognize one another specifically, rather than simply greeting whichever seahorse happens to be nearest on any given morning, finding their way back, again and again, to that same particular partner, the way you might recognize one particular voice in a room otherwise full of many others. In warmer water, her whole rhythm moves along a little faster than it might elsewhere, broods arriving somewhat sooner, one after another, compared to cousins living in cooler seas further from the equator, where everything, including birth itself, simply takes its own sweet time a little more slowly. Not every newborn drifts far from where it started out, either. In some meadows, a portion of the young will simply cling to the nearest grass right where they were first released, never venturing far at all from that spot, while only some scatter wide the way hares once did, carried off toward distant shores. Just behind her head, two small fins she rarely thinks much about at all, her pectoral fins, work quietly alongside her dorsal fin, helping her steer and keep her balance rather than push her forward through the water, small, quiet helpers to the one fin doing most of the actual work. Unlike most fish, whose whole body bends and sways from side to side as they swim forward, her frame can't flex that way at all, not even slightly. Nearly all of her flexibility lives in that one curled, patient tail instead, the only part of her truly built to bend. The meadow is fully still now, and so, somewhere in its own distant patch of grass, is the one that drifted here so long ago, and so, in whatever way a small seahorse settles into sleep, is she. Let yourself settle the very same way. Still. Unbending. Held. Rest. For a long time, people believed her family held far more distinct species than it actually does, until careful genetic study, decades later, quietly revealed that some seahorses once thought to be entirely separate kinds were really just the same species wearing different colors, shaped over generations by whatever particular patch of reef they each happened to call home. It's a gentle sort of correction, the kind science makes fairly often without much fanfare, not a dramatic discovery, just a quiet adjustment to something that turned out to be simpler than first assumed. She was never two different things pretending to be one. She was always exactly herself, however many names people happened to give her along the way. Not every seahorse holds onto grass at all, either, wherever it happens to live. In places where the sea floor offers little else to grip, some will anchor instead to whatever quiet, steady thing happens to drift within reach, a length of old rope trailing from some forgotten anchor line, anything roughly the right size for a small tail to circle comfortably. Wherever there is something still enough to hold, a seahorse will usually find some way to make use of it. In cooler regions, when a sharp cold snap moves suddenly through, some populations will quietly shift towards slightly warmer patches of water nearby, an instinctive small migration rather than any true long journey, just enough movement to stay comfortable until conditions ease back to normal again. Through the daylight hours, she eats almost continuously, her simple digestive system moving food through her body quickly enough that she must always be finding the very next small meal, over and over, hour after hour. Though as night falls, the way it has now, that steady, constant hunting finally slows, and stillness takes over instead, the way it always eventually does. The strike of her snout, so fast it barely seems entirely real, works less like a muscle straining hard against resistance and more like a small spring being quietly released, a delicate hinge at the base of her jaw storing up tension until the exact right moment arrives, then letting go all at once, faster than thought. Far off, the young one from the raft, back when it first settled into its new home, spent its earliest weeks shifting the intensity of its color several times a day, still learning, in whatever way a seahorse learns such things, exactly how to properly match the grass around it, before finally settling into the one steady shade it wears tonight, and will likely wear for the rest of its life. Not every meadow is equally good to live in, either, however green it might look at first glance. Thicker, healthier stretches of grass, with more blades growing close together, tend to hold noticeably more seahorses than thin, damaged patches nearby ever could, simply because more grass means more places to hide, and more places, in the end, to hold on. And she herself tends to settle at one particular, comfortable height above the sand, neither too close to the bottom nor too far up into open water, some quiet in-between distance that simply feels, to her, exactly right, the way certain rooms feel right to certain people without any clear reason why. Let yourself find that same comfortable middle place now, not too tense, not too loose. Just right. Just resting. People who care for seahorses in careful aquariums have noticed something small but telling, over years of quiet observation. Give a seahorse plenty of things to hold on to, and it settles quickly, calmly, without much fuss at all. Take those options away, leave it searching too long for something to grip, and it grows visibly more anxious, more restless, more unlike itself. Something as small as simply having enough to hold on to, it turns out, matters enormously to a creature built almost entirely around the quiet act of holding on. Perhaps that isn't so different from anything else that needs a steady place to rest. Take away all the small, familiar things a life holds on to, a routine, a comfortable bed, a quiet room at the end of a long day, and almost anything grows a little more restless for it. Give those things back, gently, and the restlessness tends to ease all on its own, the way hairs does the moment a new hitching post drifts within reach. Some of the smaller species keep a soft, gently rounded shape their whole lives through, never quite losing that rounded, almost younger look that many other fish tend to outgrow as they mature into adulthood. A small, permanent hint of softness carried all the way through to the very end. She and her mate, it turns out, don't save all their affection for just the one morning dance, either. Small check-ins happen throughout the entire day too, a brief brightening of color as they pass one another, a light touch of tail against tail, gone again in a single moment, easy to miss entirely unless you already know to watch closely for it. Tonight, like every night before it, the meadow settles the same unhurried way it always has. Her tail, tight around its usual chosen blade. His pouch, quiet, doing its slow, patient work exactly as it always does. Somewhere else, the one that drifted so far to find its own patch of grass, settling too, in its own separate rhythm, its own small crowned head bowed gently towards sleep. So much has passed through this story by now, currents and tides, storms and stillness, mornings and the long, dim stretch of night, one small crowned creature after another, holding on exactly the way each of them was built to. And still, through all of it, none of it has ever been in any real hurry at all. Let everything in you settle the same way now. No hurry. No effort required. Just held, gently, by whatever is nearest and softest and most like grass swaying in a slow, warm current. Rest, all the way down. Not far from her, in warmer water off a different coastline entirely, live some of her smallest relatives, dwarf seahorses, native to the Gulf of Mexico and the wider Caribbean, small and hardy enough that they've long been among the most familiar seahorses kept in quiet home aquariums around the world. It's strange to think of her whole extended family this way, scattered so widely across the globe, each small branch of it never once meeting any of the others, and yet all of them recognizably, unmistakably the same kind of creature underneath, the same patient tail, the same upright posture, the same quiet habit of holding on. Along the Atlantic coast of the Americas swims another cousin of hers, the line seahorse, living close enough to shore that researchers have studied its habits more closely than almost any other kind, simply because it happens to be so much easier to reach and quietly observe over time. Further away still, in just a handful of quiet estuaries along one particular stretch of South African coastline, lives a seahorse found nowhere else on the entire planet. One of the most narrowly confined species there is anywhere, its whole world contained within a few small, sheltered waterways that most people will never see. Her own bony plates, ringed all down the length of her body, aren't worn on the outside the way a crab's hard shell would be. They sit just beneath her skin instead, a kind of hidden armor rather than a visible one, soft to the touch on the surface even though something firm and quietly protective lies underneath the whole time. Every so often, after settling onto a fresh blade of grass, she gives a quick, small flick of her whole body, as if shaking off unseen dust, lightly clearing away tiny bits of debris, or something small and unwelcome that's managed to cling to her skin without her noticing right away. People have been drawing creatures like her for a very long time indeed. Ancient pottery and mosaics from around the Mediterranean, many thousands of years old now, already show small curling, horse-headed shapes rising up from painted waves, long before anyone had settled on a proper name for what they actually were. Some small coastal towns, over the many centuries since, have taken her particular shape as their own emblem, stitched carefully into flags or carved above old doorways, a quiet way of saying, without needing any words at all, we belong to the sea, and this is what the sea looks like to us. She has no ears you could ever actually see, not the way you might picture them in your mind. Like nearly every fish that has ever lived, she senses sound not through any visible opening at all, but through structures hidden deep inside her, feeling vibration nearly as much as she hears anything in the ordinary sense. Let your own ears rest now the same quiet way, not straining to catch anything at all, just letting whatever soft sound happens to be nearby simply move through you, unremarked, unhurried. Not far from her tonight, at a quiet bend in the reef, several small fish have gathered near a favorite outcropping of coral, waiting their turn, patient and still, while a tiny cleaner shrimp works carefully over each one in order, picking away small parasites, one visitor at a time, in an unhurried, entirely informal queue that repeats itself, unremarkably, every single day without fail. No one pushes ahead of anyone else in that quiet line. No one seems to mind the wait. It's one small, ordinary example of how much of this whole meadow runs on patience rather than urgency, cooperation rather than competition, everyone simply taking their turn and trusting the next moment to arrive exactly when it needs to. Sheltered spots like that one, calm and full of places to hide, often serve as important nurseries for many young sea creatures, seahorses very much among them, offering exactly the kind of stillness a small, unfinished life needs before it's ready for anything rougher out in open water. When it comes to her own eggs, size and age matter a good deal. An older, larger female typically passes along more eggs to her mate than a younger, smaller one ever could, her body simply capable, by then, of producing more than it once was able to. Once that transfer is finally done, her direct part in that particular brood is essentially finished for the season. She may still visit her mate daily, brighten briefly near him, touch tails with him in passing. But from that point onward, the actual growing itself belongs entirely to him and him alone. If you trace the curl of her tail closely enough, you'd notice it nearly always spirals in the very same direction, inward, toward her belly rather than away from it, one small, quiet consistency shared across nearly her whole family, wherever in the wide world you happen to find one drifting. Smell means considerably less to her than it might to certain other fish. She relies far more heavily on sight, and on sensing the faintest movement passing through the water nearby, than she ever does on any scent drifting past her on the current. And because her whole life moves so slowly, so economically, so carefully, she needs far less oxygen overall than a faster, more restless fish of similar size would ever require, her slow, steady gill rhythm perfectly matched to a life spent mostly, contentedly, still. In the end, everything about her seems to point toward that very same quiet strategy. Not speed, not strength, but stillness instead, surviving, simply, by being almost impossible to notice at all. Let that same stillness settle fully into you now. Unnoticed, unhurried, entirely at ease. Rest. People who keep seahorses in careful home aquariums learn fairly quickly that they need calm, unhurried company around them at all times. Fast, competitive tank mates will simply outrace her to every meal without even trying, so she does best surrounded by others who share her own same slow, unhurried pace through the water. It's a fitting kind of need, in the end, for a creature built so entirely around stillness. She doesn't ask for excitement, doesn't need anything dramatic happening around her. She simply asks for a pace that matches her own, and a little patience from whoever, or whatever, happens to share her small corner of the world. Some of her smaller relatives, like the dwarf seahorse, are ready to begin having young of their own after only a few months of life, far sooner than larger cousins who may wait a full year or more before their very first brood arrives. Exactly how many distinct kinds of seahorse exist in the world is still, in a small way, being carefully worked out even now. Most careful counts land somewhere between about 40 and 50 separate species, though the exact number continues to shift slightly as researchers keep refining and re-examining the whole family tree with newer methods. She can tolerate a good deal of change in her world, but not quite everything. Sudden shifts in the water saltiness, or in its overall chemical balance, unsettle her far more than a slow, gradual change ever would, even for a creature that's otherwise fairly adaptable to its surroundings. Some divers and underwater photographers spend years specializing almost entirely in finding creatures like her, treasuring a clear, close sighting the way others might treasure something rare and genuinely hard-won, precisely because she's so very easy to miss entirely. If a diver stays still, breathes slowly, and doesn't reach for her at all, she often shows very little alarm in return, sometimes allowing a long, quiet, close observation that far more skittish, easily frightened fish would never permit from anyone. In careful captivity, tiny brine shrimp are often used to feed young seahorses in their earliest weeks, standing in reasonably well for the copepods and mysid shrimp they'd naturally hunt for themselves out in open water. Long ago, sailors half glimpsing a curl of drifting kelp or storm debris in poor evening light may sometimes have mistaken its shape for something considerably stranger, something almost serpent-like, one small, speculative thread among many that some believe helped shape old, half-remembered tales of sea serpents told around ports for centuries. And when she does grip tightly onto something, her tail can withstand a genuinely surprising amount of pulling force before ever letting go at all. One more reason a hungry predator, even one determined enough to actually find her, will often simply give up and move on to easier prey elsewhere. Let your own grip on the day loosen now, the way hers never really has to, because nothing out here tonight is pulling at you at all. In cooler waters, some populations of the very same species tend to grow slightly larger over a lifetime than their warm water counterparts living elsewhere, a subtle regional pattern, seen across many different kinds of animals throughout the world, that researchers have noticed holds true for her family too, in its own small way. It's one more quiet reminder of how thoroughly a place can shape a life without that life ever choosing it directly. She didn't decide how large to grow, any more than you decided the shape of the room you first learned to sleep in. The water simply asked something of her, over years and years, and her body simply answered, the way bodies tend to, slowly, patiently, without complaint. Where seahorses are bred carefully in captivity specifically for conservation purposes, real, careful attention goes into keeping the gene pool varied enough that small, isolated populations don't grow too similar to one another across too many generations. Even closely related species living quite near one another in the wild generally don't interbreed at all, each one holding faithfully to its own particular rituals, its own colors, its own small daily signals, close enough to recognize a stranger passing by, but never quite close enough to mistake one for a proper mate. In captivity, a current that's simply too strong can exhaust her every bit as thoroughly as a real ocean storm would out in the wild, which is exactly why the calmest, most careful aquariums keep their water moving only very gently, the way a healthy meadow naturally tends to on its own. Even now, after everything, new discoveries keep quietly arriving. One of the very smallest seahorse species known to science was only formally described within the last 20 years or so, a small, quiet reminder of just how much about creatures like her is still, even today, being learned for the very first time by someone, somewhere. She seems, in her own particular way, to prefer feeding through the softer, dimmer hours of the day, more active in low light than she ever tends to be under the hardest, brightest midday sun. And just before settling fully for the night, the way she is right now, her color tends to deepen once more, quietly, gradually, the way a room might dim gently before sleep finally arrives. So here, at the end of this long, unhurried telling, from her very first morning dance at the beginning, all the way to this last, deep, settled dark, one thing has stayed exactly the same, in every meadow, in every ocean, in every small life quite like hers. Something small, holding gently onto something steady, letting the tide do the rest of the work for it, the way it always eventually does. Her tail is wound tight around its blade of grass. Her mate rests quietly beside her. Somewhere far off, so does the one that drifted so long ago to find its own quiet patch of green. And so, now, at last, do you. Nothing more to hold on to tonight, except sleep itself. Rest. All the way down. For as long as you need. Good night.